A couple of weeks ago, we dove into a new series on the kingdom. Every January, we like to talk about the kingdom of God and what that means. For some of us, that's kind of like a big, lofty idea that we're not really sure how to grab hold of, and so we wanted to define it and make it really practical because we believe that the kingdom of God is a practical thing that impacts all of reality. It's the thing Jesus talked about more than anything else. Now, when we started talking about it a couple of weeks ago, we put up a few concentric circles just to kind of illustrate something, and I think we can put that back up on the screen now. And we talked about the reality that when we think about things changing and about the world changing, we want to go out and we want to be world changers. We see brokenness and we see all of the issues of our world and we want to get our hands on it and we want to do something about it. That's good and beautiful. It's from the Lord. Okay? But there's this other reality that we have to understand and grasp, and that's we don't change out there until in here changes. And so what we really have to be aware of is that change and grabbing hold of the kingdom, it starts first with the innermost part of us, our understanding of what that means, of what God is doing, of what he's up to in the world. We talked about the difference between normal, everyday experience and the way of heaven, the way God desires things, and what happens when those things are different. And then the next outworking of that isn't somewhere around us, it's still somewhere in us. It goes beyond our understanding and it starts to affect me. It starts to affect my life and my thinking and how I respond. We talked about it in terms of continual alignment and repentance with the Lord. That's an ongoing thing for all of us. Now this week we want to get out to the next sphere. We want to get out to the people that are closest to us. But first I want to talk about snow. Now, we might be on different pages there, friend. I don't love the snow. I don't like snow. I think it's pretty, but it's messy and it's cold, and the moment we leave autumn, I'm waiting for spring. That's how I'm built, okay? So when snow comes, I don't love it, but there is something in me that does have this kind of deep down appreciation for it, okay? And I think it's actually called nostalgia. When I was growing up, we lived in the flatlands of West Michigan, but I had, the town we lived in was very sandy, so it was good for growing grapes, very agricultural. And the other thing that it did is it created old sand dunes that were now very small sand dunes. And there were a couple of those in our town, and when it snowed, that was the sledding spot. We didn't have a whole lot of them, okay? But we did have a couple of sledding spots, and we would go out there and we would make horrible decisions, like standing in the way of our friends who were coming down the hill and letting them hit us. I don't know why we did that. Okay, that gives you a little peek into how my brain doesn't work. But we would do that, and it was painful, but also incredibly enjoyable. We'd zoom down, we'd make jumps, and we'd hit the jumps, and again, get hurt. But it was a lot of fun. And so when snow comes around, there's something familiar about it. Even if I don't love everything about it, there's something familiar about it. You see, familiarity is oftentimes, when we've been detached from something that's familiar and positive, we call that nostalgia. Even though nostalgia literally means homesick, it means to be sick for home, but those memories and the feelings of familiarity and joy that come along with that, they give us that feeling of nostalgia. Familiarity can be an incredibly powerful thing. Scientifically speaking, there's a whole psychology behind this. Scientifically speaking, familiarity it has a positive correlation to happiness. What scientists have found is that the more familiar things you have around you, the more you're happy in life. Well, that's a really positive thing. We find comfort, we find security, we find enjoyment in that which is familiar. Now, there's also a downside to familiarity. I remember several years ago, I started discipling a young man, helping him follow Jesus a little bit more. And as I was getting to know him and hear what God was doing in his life, he shared with me that one of the things he and his college friends liked to do was they would go 30 minutes up the road, and they'd go to the closest city, and they would go pray with people and just share the love of Jesus in like a really gentle, non-threatening way. They would just find opportunities to pray for people and share the love of Jesus with them. And I thought that was a really beautiful thing. the way they were describing it. And so I got curious. I wanted to ask more questions. I said, that's awesome. Do your friends, do they live in that city? And he said, no, they live in our town, a town of 5,000 people, very small, rural, corn and dairy town. And I thought, oh, okay, that's cool. You're doing something with your buddies. But it got me thinking a little bit more. And so I just asked the simple question, well, you guys go and pray for people there. That's wonderful. Nothing wrong with that. Do you guys do that here in our town? He said, no, we don't. I just asked, well, why? We're oftentimes not prepared for the question why. We don't know what drives a lot of the things that we do or don't do. And so he paused a moment and he thought about it and he said, well, I think things are just too familiar here. Things are a little bit too familiar. People know me too well, and so we just go to where people don't know me and I pray there. Okay, we can hang with that. There's good stuff going on. But what it does is it shows us the reality of the limitations, not just the beautiful part, but the limitations of familiarity. When things are familiar to us, the everyday things we encounter, the people that we encounter all of the time in our lives, they become familiar. That can be a beautiful and secure thing. And there's a reverse side of it that is limiting. Now, the answer isn't always to go off far away. It's easiest to take part in new activities in a completely new context because that doesn't change our familiar. The hardest thing to change is that which is most familiar. The hardest place for God to bring your gifts alive is around the people who know you the best. But why? And does it have to be that way? I want to invite you to turn with me to Mark chapter 5. If you have a Bible with you, you can follow along. We're going to read a lengthy passage, and it's a beautiful passage. There's a whole lot we could dive into. I wish we could walk through it more thoroughly. We're just not going to have time this morning, but we're going to look at the story and look at the outcome of the story in the life of Jesus. And I think there's something good for us in it. So Mark chapter 5, we're going to be in the first 20 verses. This is Jesus and his disciples, they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and he would cut himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. And the demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, Go to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. Again, this is a massive story, And there's so much that we could learn about demons and the reality of God wanting to free people from demonic oppression. That's a real thing, and we believe it. We believe it still goes on today. But there's some really beautiful moments in this story that we're going to settle in on. First, let's just kind of understand what's going on. Jesus and his disciples have been largely in the city of Capernaum. Capernaum became Jesus' home base of ministry, so much so that in the second chapter of Mark, Jesus is from Nazareth. He's from Galilee. He was born in a different town. He's not from Capernaum. But when he comes to Capernaum, he ends up setting his home base there, so that eventually in Mark chapter 2, it says when Jesus returned home, it's talking about Capernaum. He kind of moved in there. That's where the source of ministry was for Jesus. So there's a lot of people that are getting to know Jesus. They're seeing what he's doing, and they're really starting to crowd in around him, so much so that Jesus needs to find some times to have a break. Parents, you know what I'm talking about. Your kids are pressing in around you, and you just lock the bathroom door, and you're getting away, and you're like, any room that I can lock is good enough. So Jesus needs to get away. He needs to get a little bit of space and time. His disciples need a little bit of space and time, so he gets them all in a boat. They get on the lake because Capernaum is next to a lake, and so they get on this boat, and they travel across the lake. Now, Capernaum is largely Jewish population. Across the lake is not Jewish. That's considered Gentile. And it's a region called the Decapolis, 10 cities. So it's a region where there's 10 close-knit towns, kind of like the Tri-Cities, or as we like to refer to it in our family, Tri-Town. And so we have this area that is densely populated. There's a few different towns, and that's a Gentile region, largely not Jewish. So they get in the boat, and they cross over to there. And when they get out of the boat, they're approached by a man who sees Jesus coming from far off. Now, we read a few things about this man. We see that Jesus gets out of the boat. We read that this man has an impure spirit, and he comes to meet them. We also read a few things about his lifestyle. He lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him. So they tried to chain this guy. They tried to subdue him. Nobody was strong enough to bind him. Nobody could keep him subdued. Now, that might sound kind of harsh, but really think about it. They're not sure what's going on. This man is living out in the tombs. He's a harm to himself. As far as we know, he's not much of a harm to anybody else. He's pretty removed from society. He lives among the dead. But he's harming himself. He's cutting himself, and he's crying out day and night. They hear the torment of the man, and the best they know how to do is to try to keep him from hurting himself. It's not dissimilar to when people have severe mental health issues and they're a harm to themselves. We will put people in restraints for their own good. That's the best version that they had. They didn't have padded rooms. They didn't have soft jackets. They didn't have sedatives. They had chains, but those weren't working. They did everything they could to help this man, to keep him from himself. But there was a greater force at work, something that was so powerful, not even iron could bind him. No amount of people could subdue him. This man was being tormented incredibly. And so Jesus comes on the scene. He greets this man. The man falls in front of him and shouts, "What do you want with me, Son of the Most High God?" Now, as far as I'm aware, there's no introductions at this point. Jesus hasn't introduced himself. Jesus doesn't go around saying, "Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Son of the Most High." Yet this man who is, we read, has impure spirit, he comes and he has this confession of who Jesus is. He knows his real identity, but he doesn't know it in his human nature. He knows it because of the impure spirits. He says, "What do you want with me, Son of the Most High God? Don't torment me." Now, Jesus is not picking on the guy. Jesus isn't being mean to the guy. All that we know that Jesus is doing is Jesus is saying to the demonic presence in him, come out of this man. Impure spirit, come out. And so what we understand is the torment that's happening. When the man cries out, "Don't torment us," he's not speaking from his human nature. He's speaking from the demonic presence. The demons are speaking out. They're recognizing who Jesus is. They're speaking to his true identity. And they're feeling the torment of the presence of God close at hand. They know who he is, and they know why he's come, and they know the power he has, and just the words come out of this man feels like torment to the demonic presence. That's the power of God that gets carried around. So the man shouts, "What do you want with me? Don't torment me. In God's name, don't torment me." Jesus had been saying, "Come out." But then Jesus pauses, and he says, "What is your name?" Now, we have a lot of accounts of Jesus casting out impure spirits or demons out of people. There's a lot of accounts of this all over Scripture. This is one of the few accounts where things are slowed down a lot, where Jesus actually has more of an interaction, where there's a little bit more process behind this that we get to read about. And so Jesus asks the name. Now, again, he's likely not asking the name of the individual because the response that Jesus is satisfied is not the name of an individual. Jesus asks, "What is your name?" And the response from the man is, "My name is Legion, for we are many." The idea here isn't a specific name of a demonic presence, although it could have been. It's the reality that there's a lot of unclean and tormenting spirits in this man's life, an overwhelming amount. Legion referred to a number of the Roman guards. That there were thousands of demons in this man. He was incredibly tormented. And after they reply, "My name is Legion, for we are many," they go on to begging Jesus again not to send them out of the area. Oftentimes, demons are territorial in nature. That one of the things we do know about demons through reading through Scripture is that once they have had an embodied presence, that's what they like. They don't like the unembodied presence anymore. Once they're in a territory, they don't like to leave that territory. And so they beg Jesus, "Don't send us out of this territory." Now, as all of this is going on, there's a herd of pigs nearby. There's a lot of pigs. It's the crop this area is tending. It's the herd this area is tending. And so the demons recognize that there's pigs close by. And so what they do is they ask Jesus if it's okay if they, instead of just leaving and having to roam empty and void of any embodied presence, if they could go into the pigs. They ask permission. "Well, can you at least send us into the pigs?" And Jesus allows it. He says, "Yes, you can go into the pigs." He gives permission. And so they do. And this herd, about 2,000 in number, rush down a steep bank into the lake, and they are drowned. Now, this seems inhumane, right? Now, I want to pause for a second, because not for one moment do I think that Jesus doesn't care about all creation. We read in Scripture that by him, by Christ, in him and to him are all things. Everything that has breath, everything that is in existence came through the person of Jesus. So for not for 1 minute do I think that this tragedy and the loss of animals is not a big deal to Jesus. Scholars would suggest that there's a number of things going on. Scholars would suggest that there is something happening in this man, and in order for proof, for verification of the change of what was inside of him, this legion of demons, there has to be some kind of verifiable evidence that there was a spiritual presence in the person. So it's very likely that Jesus allowed this to allow for proof in the people's understanding. You see, if something just happened, if somebody just started acting normal again, it might breed a little bit of skepticism. Well, was he really that way? Was he really experiencing what he said or what we believed he was experiencing, or was this all just an act? But Jesus gives permission, and the evil spirits, the impure spirits, they go into over 2,000 pigs, and they rush into the waters. Now, in this time, the time of this writing, and for centuries beyond that, water represented chaos. Water was something that couldn't be tamed. They were primordial. They existed before the order of all creation. They have existed for a long time, and nobody can tame the waters. They embody the chaos of the universe. So much so that we still don't get out on rough waters if we can avoid it. We go out when the water is pleasant because we have no control over the water. In every mythology, in every spiritual worldview of the time, water represented chaos, and the divinity would have power over the chaos. Only the divine had power over the chaos. And so what we see is this chaotic presence in the man. The man was ruled by chaos. He shouted and he cut himself and he lived among the dead. He lived among the disorder of the world, the brokenness of the world. And now the chaos that was in him returns to the dark chaos of the waters. They return to that which represents their very nature of brokenness and chaos. Now, when this happens, it really freaks people out. You could imagine so, right? If you were to see this happening, be honest, you'd be freaked out too. You might think, I'm pretty sure I understand what's going on, but I'm not 100% certain. I'm a little bit afraid, and I'm not sure what to think. I think that's how the herdsmen and the people who were around this event were also viewing it. And so they get scared and they run off and they tell the people in their town. And some of those people from the town, the closest town by, they come out to see what the herdsmen were talking about. And when they return, I love this part of the passage. When those tending the pigs ran off and reported to the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened, and when they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there and dressed and in his right mind. The chaos that was in the man is not there any longer. The kingdom of Jesus, the truth of the kingdom has moved his life from chaos to order. Because that's what it does. The presence of God, his rule and reign, brings the chaos of our lives into order. It brings it from brokenness to healing, from disassociation to right mind. The description of the man before was he was uncontrollable, he would cut himself and he would cry out, and now the description of the man is he's sitting and still and peaceful and dressed, no longer running around naked and chaotic, but he's dressed and appropriate and he's in his right mind. I love that. I love it. That's what Jesus does for us. But for the people who saw it, it triggered something a little different in them. This man who couldn't be controlled, this man who couldn't be contained, has now been changed radically, and their response to Jesus was fear. They saw the man who was sitting and dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those other people who had seen it and had been told what had happened to the demon-possessed man, they told about the pigs as well, and when they did that, in verse 17, we read that the people began to plead with Jesus. All they could do was beg. They didn't feel like they had any power over him. They didn't have power over the man that Jesus had just overpowered. And so now they know they don't have any power over Jesus. And all they can do is plead with him, please leave. We don't know what to do with this. We don't know what to do with the level of power that we just saw. We're not even sure entirely what to make of it. Would you please leave our region? And I love Jesus' response. He gets in the boat. You see, Jesus is a gentleman. He doesn't go where he's not invited, and he doesn't stay where he's not wanted. He doesn't ever force his way into your heart. He simply offers you clothing and a right mind. But the people were afraid, and they asked him to leave. And so he goes to get in the boat. And as he's doing that, he and his disciples are getting into the boat. And the man who had the legion of demons in him runs after him, and he begs and pleads to go with Jesus. I mean, wouldn't you? If something like that happened, would you not run after the one who made it happen? Would you not seek for more? Of course we would. And I think from Jesus' perspective, that would make a lot of sense too. Bring along the guy who was radically transformed. That's good PR. That's going to draw a crowd. Hey, line on up, see the guy? 2,000 demons. One guy. Check him out now. That seems like it would sell, doesn't it? But that's not what Jesus does. Jesus' response is, he says instead, go to your own people and tell how much the Lord has done. Go to your own people and tell how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. When I was just learning about things of the Holy Spirit, when I was just starting to accept that what we read about Jesus in Scripture and in the Bible wasn't just a then thing, it's also a now thing. That the way God works always has been and always will be the way he continues to work. The things he does, he will miraculously move things from chaos to order. And so I wanted to start investigating and seeing what was out there in terms of YouTube videos. I thought, surely if something incredible is going on, people are going to take video of it now. That's the age we live in. And so I would go on to YouTube and I would watch miraculous things. I would watch interviews with people who claim to be raised from the dead. I would watch interviews or video clips of worship gatherings where there was gold dust or feathers falling. And I didn't have a frame of reference for the things, but I knew that if God could cast out a legion of demons, that God could do whatever the heck he wants to do now. And I allowed it to build my faith. I was a little caught off guard when I would start to scroll. You ever like something you see online and then you scroll to the comments section and then it's all just downhill from there? I was a little caught off guard when I scrolled past some of these videos, especially for the ones in the U.S., where the comments were very accusatory. There were comments of people accusing staging and fake and all sorts of setups just to fool people into something. Now, I understand there are a lot of shysters out there. I understand there are a lot of con people out there. I understand that there are all sorts of people who would love to leverage whatever you believe in for their own benefit. That exists. But I also know that God still works in incredibly powerful ways. And so I started to wonder, why is that our response to hearing about the incredible things that Jesus has done in somebody's life? And at least in part, this is what I've arrived at. When we watch a video of something that happens out there or somewhere we're not familiar with, we might hear a reputation of the leader that we don't like, but we don't know him. We don't know her. We might see a story or an interview with somebody who claims to have been raised from the dead, and they might even be holding up a certificate of death with their name on it. But we all know, well, I could print that out in Canva as well. You don't know them. They don't know you. You don't know their story. You didn't see them dead. And the removal from that person and that experience is unfamiliar. We don't know them. We don't know their story, and skepticism starts to come in. And I think there's part of the strategy of Jesus in this story, knowing that if he brought this demoniac who has now been healed and restored into the lives of other people, they might just look at him and say, I don't know you. I don't know that you had demons. That doesn't matter to me. You're just a normal guy. But when Jesus tells him to go to his own people, he tells him to go back to the family members that knew him before he was in the state in which he met Jesus. When Jesus tells this man to go back to the towns he was in, these are the towns that heard him crying out from the tombs all night long. These are the people who had tried to help him and chain him, and they could verify the state that he was in, and now they're so terrified of the power of Jesus because they know that man's story. And Jesus says, you can't come with me. You need to go tell people that knew you. Because what they're familiar with is they're familiar with you cutting yourself, you being out of control, and you being not in your right mind. And you need to go back and tell them that Jesus has put you in your right mind. You see, his story was most powerful to the familiar. The first place of overflow for this man's experience of the presence of God in the person of Jesus was the people that were closest to him. Maybe the people that he used to have business dealings with, or in the marketplace, or the small town that watched him grow up. That's the power. That's the powerful place where his story will be told. Now there's another obscure passage I want to take us to really briefly. It's in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah 3:28. Now, Nehemiah is a book all about the restoration of the city of Israel. At this point in time, Israel has been unfaithful to God. They've broken the agreement they had with him. And so God has removed his protection from them, and they've made a lot of enemies along the way. They've conquered people. The land that they inhabited wasn't theirs originally. It was somebody else's, and they kicked them out. God gave them the property, and now people want it back. For generations, they've wanted it back. And so God removes his hand of protection, and they are able to take out Israel. And the result is that the city of Jerusalem, their capital city, the heartbeat of the worship of the people of God, has been torn down. It's been obliterated. There's very few structures left. The wall that protected the city is in shambles. And the people of Israel have been carried off into exile. Now, along the way, generations after the exile, some of the leaders of Israel come to rulers who are favorable toward the people of God, and they say, will you let us go back and rebuild our city? Would you let us go back and rebuild our temple so that we can rightly worship God? That's the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is one of the first people that comes out of exile to come back to the remnant of the people who were in Israel and help rebuild the walls of the city. Now, there's a whole lot of rebuilding that happens, and there's a whole lot of adversity. Nehemiah is an incredible book. I'd encourage you to read it. But there's this little obscure passage in verse 28 of chapter 3. It says, above the horse gate, the priests made repairs, each in front of his own house. Now, the first time I read this, it just stood out to me. It's the only group of people that tend to the wall repairs right in front of their own house. Now, there's a lot of houses in Israel. If you look at a map of how things were laid out, they're not anywhere close to a wall. Some were, others weren't. The priests were situated right next to the wall of the city. And so a lot of people had to go away and they had to repair the broken wall around them. But when it came time for the priests, they walk out their front door and they start making the repairs in the broken wall that are closest to where they live. And I remember reading this, and I remember asking the Lord why he was capturing my attention through this. And he spoke very clearly to my heart. And he said, that's because I've called my people to attend to the brokenness that is right in front of them. But we don't do it because it's so familiar. We just accept it for what it is, and it's the hardest thing to change. The other thing that stands out to me is in the New Testament, after the Spirit of God has been poured out on all flesh, his church is known as a kingdom of priests. And it's the priests who attend to the brokenness of the wall right outside their front door. And here's where we get down to it. There's brokenness in the world all around us. There's broken down walls all around us. There are people oppressed all around us, people being tormented by the chaos of life all around us. And we allow that which is closest to us to be so limiting in its familiarity, we don't repair the wall. And God is calling us to repair the wall. He's calling us to step into the broken places, the places that are right under our noses, and realize this truth. The overflow of your life should affect those closest to you. Listen, if you've experienced the love of Christ, if you've experienced the transforming power of his presence in your life, if his kingdom of truth has undone the lies of your life in some way, shape, or form, maybe not totally, nobody's perfect, that's not the claim. But if you've had a taste of the power of God, the overflow of his presence in your life, the first place that should reach is the wall right in front of you. The people who know your story should see the change. There are people that are right out front of your door. And I believe Jesus this morning is saying, listen, it's wonderful if you want to go across the world. The Lord knows we need missionaries all over the world. We do, and we're going to talk a little bit about that next week. But this week, I feel like the word of the Lord for us is to understand where he's already sent you. You and I are sent. That's why we are where we are. And if your life is experiencing the overflow of the presence of God, that should splash onto the people that walk closest to you. They're in the splash zone. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be a person who is transformed by the power of God, and you simply share what has changed. That's the splash of the overflow on the people closest to you. They might not even be able to make sense of it. They might see something happening. They might see the chaos leaving your life. And they might not have words for it, but they see something change. Sometimes that's going to create a decision point in people's lives. And their decision will be, I need you to leave. I don't know what to make of this. I need you to leave. That's not your choice, and you have no control over that. Jesus didn't force himself to stay. But it created a decision point. Your overflow, the overflow that affects the people closest to you first, should cause a decision-making point. Last week we said that our life is continually changing if we're continually aligning with the Lord. And if that's happening, the overflow of the presence of God should continue to increase and affect those around you. You should never lack for a story of change in your life. Our life should be filled with stories of, this is what God did in my marriage. And guess what? If God has done something in your marriage, you have good news and truth for somebody else who's going through a hard time in their marriage. That's the gospel of the kingdom, bringing truth to lies. If God has healed something or answered a prayer in some way, that's a moment that you've had with him. That's a bit of the overflow of the presence of God in your life. That's a story that you get to share with others. That's a moment to share. That's a moment that God is going to use to rebuild the wall, the broken moments right outside your front door. Now, we can all be people who enter into the repair of the brokenness right out our front door. And I want to give us a few handles this morning and how we can do that. And the first one is it's really simple. It's pray. It's pray. Now, that might seem overly simplistic, but here's the reality of prayer, is it's the most powerful force. It breaks my heart when I see people say, I don't need your thoughts and prayers right now, and I think, I don't know if you understand the power of prayer. Prayer is an incredibly powerful thing, and you have people in your life who are outside your metaphorical front door, and we need to be passionately praying that Jesus will enter into their lives and that they will experience his love and truth, not because they're wrong or bad, but because his love is so good. Everybody needs Jesus. I need Jesus every single day of my life. You need Jesus every single day of your life, and we need to be praying passionately with tears and fasting and weeping for the people we know that don't know Jesus, who are outside our front door until something happens. I've prayed with a lot of Christians over time. And what I've noticed about praying Christians is we'll pray for a thing as it's a passing thought. And then we think a thing is done. But Jesus tells this story of a parable. It's a parable of a woman who's a widow, and there's an injustice done to her. And so she goes to the judge to get justice, but nothing is happening. It's not that the judge doesn't hear her, he just hasn't acted on it yet. And so until she gets what she wants, she goes to the judge again and again and again. And we read in the parable that even though the judge doesn't really want to give her her way, he feels like he's going to be bored to death by her persistence until he gives her what she needs. And so he answers her request. And then Jesus says, that's how you should pray. You know, somebody asks us to pray, and I'm guilty of this. I'll say, all right, I'm praying for you, and then I pray in the moment, and then I'm like, I did it. But how often do I pray until something happens? The people I know that have come to Jesus have actually not come because I'm great with sharing the good news of Jesus. Actually, I'm not very good at it, but I'm getting better. They've come to Jesus because I relentlessly pray for them. And so here's what I would challenge you to do. Make a list of 5 people in your life that don't know Jesus. Put them on a list and put them somewhere where you will see it every single day so that you can pray and you can fast and you can weep over them until you see something change. You do that, I promise you, you will see something. It will move your heart, it will move their heart, and it will move the Lord's heart to action. Pray until something happens. And the second item I'd encourage you to do is to share. Just as the man the demoniac has something change in his life, Jesus says, go back and tell what the Lord has done for you. Listen, if you had a life change, if you've experienced the love of God, you have a change story you can share with others. Now imagine if somebody comes up to the demoniac that doesn't know his story, they've been out of town for a little while, and they say, hey, how's your life going? And he's like, busy but good. He's lying. Because the truth of his life is how much has radically changed. Now here's the truth for every follower of Jesus. You and I should be encountering the Lord on a regular basis so that when somebody asks us, how is life? Your honest answer is the last thing God did for you. I remember growing up in a Baptist church. My dad's still a Baptist pastor. He's almost retired. He's looking forward to it. I've been looking forward to retirement since I entered the workforce. But he's on the other end of it. And he's getting close to it. But I remember we grew up in a very small Baptist church. There were 30 people in the church, and we had 2 services on Sunday. We had the regular Sunday morning service, and Sunday evening was a special service. I actually really liked it. I didn't know there were other songs we could sing behind hymns, and there's nothing wrong with hymns. I just didn't know there were other songs out there. And so Sunday night was the night we would show up, and it was like a choose-your-own hymn adventure, where we would get the hymnal book out. That's the song book in the churches. And we'd get it out, and when the song was over that we just sang, the next person to shout out a number was the one who got their song sang. Now, it's pretty impressive that the pianists and the organists could play those just on the spot. But they did, and they'd go and they'd sing the song, and I'd request the same one every single time. Now, sometimes on those same evenings, there would be testimony sharing. A testimony is simply a story of what God has done in your life. And I remember there were these sweet ladies that would get up. They were about 70 years old, and they would share the same story every single time. And they would share about the time that Jesus had changed their life. And I remember hearing it the first time thinking, that's so sweet. I love it. And I was even really young at the time, but I remember thinking that. And then they'd get up and they'd share that story again. And again, we were there for 11 years. And the story that they were sharing was still 50 years old. And it stuck with me because I realized that was the last time they experienced the love of God. You can't share with others what God is doing in your life now if your last story was 50 years ago. Well, that's not what God wants for you either. He has ongoing experiences, not just to make you feel joyful and euphoric. That's not God's purpose. It's to bring your chaos into order, as only He can. That'll give you stories. That'll give you something to share. You see, the good news of the kingdom is the last time you encountered the presence of God. Everywhere Jesus went was good news of the kingdom. Everywhere Jesus goes now is good news of the kingdom. And the way we bring the kingdom today is having continual encounters with God so that we overflow in the lives of others and we share the stories of what God has done in your life and how He has shown you grace and mercy. It's entering into the broken places of the wall and allowing our stories to be faith builders and to repair the cracks. Both sharing and the final step are going to require something from us. That final step, if we've prayed and we've shared, it's invitation. You see, when we share, it's always an invitation for people to make a decision. They have to choose whether they believe what you're saying or not. And it's not on you whether they believe. The man who was demonized is now a fork in the road kind of an individual. He's a crisis kind of a person. But when you and I pray for others, God will bring up opportunities for us to share with the people closest to us what he has done in our lives. And then it's our joy, it's our delight to be able to invite people. And here's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about inviting people into your life. Now, if they're family, they're already in your life. But maybe the invitation is to something else. Many of you are a part of our communities. Those are the groups that we have that meet in homes throughout the week. Invite them to that. Invite them unashamedly to experience what you experience. If you've shared a story and they're still interested in being around you, I promise you they're open to seeing more. You don't have to force anything to happen, you just invite. Invite them into that space where you just do what you do as an authentic follower of Jesus. Invite them here on a Sunday morning. They have freedom to be who they are. You don't have to be in here this morning and agree with us. We're okay with that. The invitation is simply to test. As Jesus said, taste and see if the Lord is good. The invitation is simply that. Where will you invite people? Invite them into your home. Invite them to experience what you experience. Invite them into relationship. Invite them on a Sunday morning. If you've been praying for them, I promise you, if the opportunity comes up, it's the right time to invite. That is what the Lord gives us opportunity to do. That is what we can have and what we can take part in. And it's the work God is giving us to do together. And I think if we can live this way, starting with the most powerful thing, that prayer being the most powerful piece of it all, we are going to become a crisis people. Now, I'll tell you what I mean by that. There was a missionary named Jim. Now, Jim was a missionary to a remote tribe in Ecuador. His name was Jim Elliot. There's a movie about him, and I've never seen the movie. I don't know how accurate it is. But Jim Elliot was a missionary to an uncontacted tribe in Ecuador. And it didn't go so well for him, okay? He got killed. Now, you would think this would be this victorious, triumphant moment, but the first contact he has with him, they spear him. But the rest of his group, including his wife, never give up. And it's in light of his testimony that entire tribe came to follow Jesus. Now, Jim Elliot said a lot of wonderful things while he was still alive. One of my favorite, though, is a prayer that he would pray, and it goes this way. Father, make of me a crisis man. Bring those eye contact to decision. Let me not be a milepost on a single road. Make me a fork that men must turn one way or another on facing Christ in me. I think if we are praying passionately, not just a passing thought, but if we are praying passionately with tears, praying until we see something happen, if we're fasting and expecting, if we are sharing, if we are inviting, I think you and I will become the type of person that Jim Elliot talks about, where people encounter us, they encounter Christ in us. You and I don't transform anybody, that's not our goal. People aren't projects, we love them where they are, but if they encounter you, do they encounter Christ in you? If your last experience with Jesus' transformational love was 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, he has more for you today. He has something for you today that will allow the people who come into contact with you to have to make a choice. They either accept what they see in you or they ask you to go away. And this can often happen without sharing any words. I'm not asking anybody to convince anyone of anything. I'm asking you to live a life of overflow that causes people to make a crisis decision, a fork in the road decision. And it's going to require boldness. Now, boldness is confidence. In our case, it's confidence that Jesus is who he said he is, and if you've experienced him in your life, he is good to do it in others' lives. That's boldness in sharing. That's boldness in inviting. What I'm not inviting you to, what I'm not challenging you to, is brashness. Brashness is confidence with pride. The church has been brash for a long time and it's pushed people away. I'm not asking you to be brash. I'm asking you to be bold. Let's pray.